Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, sometimes we get some really interesting stuff sent to us,
Hmm.
and today is no exception. Someone sent us this academic paper. It's all about something called theory elaboration. I got to admit, when I first saw that title, I thought, it's just going to be boring. But
Yeah, I can see that theory elaboration. It's not exactly the most exciting title.
not at first glance.
Not really.
But then I started reading it, and I was like, wait a minute. This is actually really cool. This isn't just some dry academic exercise. It's like a secret weapon for making new discoveries and solving real problems.
That's a great way to put it. It's like taking those old theories, the ones that have been around forever, and giving them a makeover. It's like we're taking these trusty old maps, and instead of just blindly following them, we get to add our own discoveries and draw new details, maybe even find a shortcut or like a whole new route that nobody else has ever seen before.
Okay, I like this map analogy. So we're not starting from scratch. We're building on what we already know. But why bother? Like, if a theory is already working, why mess with it?
That's a good question. And it gets to the heart of why theory elaboration is so important. The world is constantly changing, right? Think about how online social networks have completely transformed the way we communicate. Like trying to explain Twitter with a communication theory from the 1950s just wouldn't work.
It'd be like trying to navigate a modern city using a map from the horse and buggy days.
Exactly. Plus, sometimes research on the same topic will give us totally different results, even conflicting results. And it's like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Theory elaboration helps us zoom in on those contradictions and figure out why we're getting these different results.
So it's like detective work. We're using the clues from the existing theories to solve these new puzzles. That makes it sound a lot more exciting than just theory elaboration.
I know, right? And sometimes researchers will try to take a theory from one field and apply it to a completely different field, like taking a psychology theory about individual motivation and then using it to understand how entire companies work. But to really make that theory work in a new context, you might need to make some adjustments.
Kind of like tailoring a suit. You've got the basic design, but you need to make some alterations so it fits perfectly.
Exactly. Now, this paper you sent me points out something interesting about management research specifically. It seems like a lot of the theories we rely on are pretty old, like decades old.
Wow. Really? So what's the problem with using these old theories? Are they like out of fashion or something?
It's not so much about being out of fashion, it's more that it's created this kind of tug of war in the field. The paper calls it fragmentation on one side and a lack of novelty on the other.
Okay, hold on. I need you to break that down for me. What do they mean by fragmentation?
Imagine a supernova, where all this energy is blasting outwards in different directions. That's kind of what's happening in management research. We have all these specialized subfields, each with their own little theories, and they're not always talking to each other.
So it's like we're so focused on these tiny little details that we're missing the big picture.
Exactly. And that's where the lack of novelty comes in.
Yeah.
Because we're so focused on these narrow areas, sometimes we end up just rehashing the same old ideas from like the 1970s.
It's like listening to a greatest hits album on repeat. Comforting, but not exactly groundbreaking.
That's a great analogy. So the question is, how do we get out of this rut? How do we bring some fresh ideas into management research?
Okay, I see the problem. So is this paper suggesting that theory elaboration is the answer? Like it's the key to overcoming this fragmentation and this lack of novelty?
That's the main argument they're making. Is like theory elaboration can be the bridge that connects all these scattered islands of knowledge, and that can help us generate truly new insights.
Yeah, and they actually point to some really influential studies that use this approach to get some pretty groundbreaking results.
Really? Like what? Well, one study looked at how information gets shared between different occupational groups. Like think about nurses and doctors in a hospital, or engineers and marketers at a tech company. And they use theory elaboration to understand how these groups can find common ground and work together more effectively.
That's something people struggle with all the time in the real world.
Right, yeah.
It's like different departments speaking different languages.
Totally. And get this, they found that the key is to develop what they called a shared translational language. It's not about making everyone an expert in every field. It's more about creating a way to communicate effectively across those different specialized areas.
So it's like building a bridge between those islands of knowledge.
Exactly. And then there was another study that looked at how hospitals adopted a new technology for cardiac surgery. And the researchers used theory elaboration to figure out the specific steps that led to a successful implementation.
This sounds really practical.
Yeah.
So this isn't just some abstract theoretical thing. It's actually helping to solve real problems.
Absolutely. And one of the things they found was that hospitals that actively involved nurses in the planning and training process had much smoother implementations.
That's interesting. It seems kind of obvious now, but I guess the existing theories didn't really account for the role of nurses in this kind of technological change.
Yeah, it's like theory elaboration helped them to see what was missing from the old way of thinking. And then there's this really cool study about diversity in work teams.
Okay, yeah, diversity. That's a hot topic these days.
For sure. And this study didn't just look at diversity in a general way, they used theory elaboration to split the idea of diversity into different perspectives.
With perspectives on diversity, what does that even mean?
It means that people can think about diversity in different ways.
Right.
Like, some people might focus on fairness and avoiding discrimination, while others might see diversity as a source of new ideas and creativity. And the study found that these different perspectives actually influence how well teams perform.
So it's not just about having a diverse team. It's about how people on that team think about diversity.
Exactly. And by using theory elaboration, they were able to explain why sometimes diversity leads to great outcomes, and sometimes it doesn't.
That's fascinating. Okay, I'm starting to see how this could be really useful in all sorts of fields. But
Yeah.
before we go too much further, can we maybe back up for a second? I want to make sure I really understand what theory elaboration is.
Sure. The paper defines theory elaboration as the process of taking existing theories and building new insights by contrasting, specifying, or structuring theoretical constructs and relations to explain what we observe in the real world.
Okay, wow. That's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful.
So basically, it's about taking an existing theory and then looking at it from different angles and maybe adding some new details and then seeing how it holds up in the real world.
That's a pretty good summary.
Okay, so we've talked about some examples of how theory elaboration has been used, but how do you actually do it? Like, what are the steps involved?
Well, the paper outlined the 7 specific tactics that researchers can use to elaborate on theories. It's like having a toolkit with different tools for different jobs.
Okay, I'm definitely interested in learning more about those tactics, but first I need to refill my coffee. Be right back. All right, I'm back and ready for more theory elaboration. Let's hear about those 7 tactics.
Okay, so before we jump into the tactics, the paper actually gives us this framework for deciding when theory elaboration is the right approach. You basically ask yourself 3 questions.
Okay, lay those questions on me.
All right, so the first question is there already a theory out there that could help explain what you're interested in? Remember, we're not building a theory from scratch, we're taking a good theory and making it even better.
So if you're dealing with something totally new, theory elaboration might not be the best way to go.
Right. You'd need to build a whole new map from the ground up. Okay, so assuming there is a relevant theory, the second question is, does that theory need some work? Like, is it controversial or ambiguous, or maybe it just doesn't fully explain what you're seeing?
Yeah, because if the theory already works perfectly, there's no point in trying to fix it.
Great. Exactly. But if the theory has some holes, or if it makes predictions that don't match reality, then it might be time for some theory elaboration. And the third question is, this one's important. Can you actually collect more data to test your elaborated theory?
Because you need to make sure your new and improved theory actually holds up.
Right. Exactly. So if you can answer yes to all 3 of those questions, then you're in good shape to start elaborating.
Perfect. Now let's get to those tactics.
Okay, so the first 2 tactics fall under the category of contrasting, and they're called horizontal contrasting and vertical contrasting.
Contrasting. That reminds me of high school English class.
Well, it's kind of like that. You're comparing and contrasting. But instead of comparing books or poems, we're comparing different situations where the theory might apply.
Yeah, I'm listening.
So horizontal contrasting is like taking a theory and applying it to different settings. Like, does the theory work the same way in a big company versus a small business?
So you're basically seeing how far you can stretch the theory before it breaks.
Exactly. And those breaking points can be really interesting because they can show you where the theory works well and where it needs some adjustments. And then there's vertical contrasting, which is like zooming in and out on a map. You're looking at the theory at different levels.
Like from the individual level to the team level to the organizational level.
Exactly. So contrasting is all about getting a more complete picture of the theory, seeing it from different perspectives. Okay, the next 2 tactics fall under the category of construct specification, and they're called new specification and construct splitting.
Construct specification.
Ah.
That sounds kind of technical.
It is a bit, but it's not as complicated as it sounds.
Hmm.
So new specification is basically about adding new concepts to the theory.
Like coming up with brand new ideas that weren't part of the original theory.
Exactly. It's like expanding the theory's vocabulary, giving it more words to work with, and that can open up whole new avenues for research.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right.
What about construct splitting?
So construct splitting is like taking a big concept
Yeah.
and breaking it down into smaller pieces.
So instead of just talking about job satisfaction, you might split it into things like satisfaction with pay, satisfaction with coworkers, and
Yeah.
satisfaction with the work itself.
Exactly. And by splitting it up like that, you can get a much more nuanced understanding of the concept.
Okay, I see how that could be helpful. So we've got contrasting, which is about looking at the theory from different angles.
Yeah.
And then we've got construct specification, which is about refining the theory's concepts. What's the last category?
The last category is structuring. And this is all about elaborating on the relationships between the concepts in the theory. There are 3 tactics here: specific relation structures, sequence structures, and recursive structures.
Okay, break those down for me.
Sure. So specific relation structures are about going beyond just saying that 2 concepts are related and really digging into the nature of that relationship.
So instead of just saying A causes B, you might say A causes B, but only under these specific conditions, or A causes B, which then causes C.
Exactly. It's about getting more precise about how the different parts of the theory fit together. And then there's sequence structures, which are all about understanding how things unfold over time.
So instead of just looking at a snapshot, you're looking at the whole process.
Exactly. And that can be really important for understanding things like organizational change or how social movements develop. And finally, we have recursive structures, which are my favorite.
Recursive structures, what are those?
Recursive structures are all about feedback loops. It's when the effect of something loops back and influences the cause.
So like how having more power can help you acquire more resources, which then gives you even more power.
Precisely. And recursive structures can be really helpful for explaining things like trends, or how systems maintain stability, or even how things can spiral out of control.
Wow, this is making my head spin, but in a good way.
It's a lot to take in, but I think it's really exciting stuff because it shows how we can take these old theories and make them even more powerful and relevant.
I totally agree. This whole deep dive has been amazing. I feel like I've learned so much.
Me too. It's been a blast. And I hope our listeners are feeling inspired to do some theory elaboration of their own.
Yes. So to everyone listening, what are you curious about? What puzzles are you trying to solve? Maybe it's time for your own deep dive. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive, and we'll see you next time.